Guess what just got delivered? Look at her in all of her glory, the Keurig. Thanks to my mom. Mom, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Hi, all right, thank you. She's a little camera shy, she doesn't want to be on camera, but she gifted me this Keurig and it's a good day to be raping, that's all I gotta say. Let's open this puppy up. Like most Gen Zers, I guess, I am someone who is very much addicted to iced coffee, and for some reason that has just meant that I've never invested in a coffee machine that can produce hot coffee. And my mom has been visiting a lot more and is moving to Chicago, so she was like, we can't have me over here and there's no way to access hot coffee, which I respect. So we're upgrading. I'm now turning into a real adult. If you come to my home, I can offer you a hot caffeinated beverage. Thanks, Mom. Also, look how pretty this is. I got the evergreen color because it matches all my appliances. So like my washer dryer is green, my desk in my office is green. I'm going through a moment where I'm very much obsessed with like really nice greens and warm like beiges and tans. There's just something about it that feels so nice, and it's really different from my last place because the last apartment I was at, it was more like cool gray tones, which at the time was my thing. But now that I'm getting older, I don't know, I just appreciate having like a warm looking and feeling space around me, you know? Like it really does a lot for your mood and your energy, so there you have it. Okay. Boom, boom. Wow, so pretty. Guess I'm gonna have to learn how to use it now because I don't actually know how to use this. We bought some pods. I guess it's pretty foolproof. You just put the pod in, right? And then you close it. You don't close your hair in it though. And coffee is made. Well, cool. Let's jump into some book stuff. All right, y'all. I'm so excited to talk about books. Books are great. Books have been incredibly transformative in my life and in the lives of so many other people. And all the books I'm gonna be sharing with you today are some of the reads that have been the most impactful and transformative in my own life, and hopefully they'll be able to do the same thing for you. The first book I'd like to recommend to you is a New York Times bestseller, The History of White People. This is really fascinating because it charts the development of race theory, how whiteness as a concept came to be and came to fruition during the Enlightenment period, and how that continues to influence literally everything about the world that we inhabit. So I feel like this is kind of a crucial read to understand the racial makeup and schema of like literally the societies that we live in. The next book that I'm recommending for you is The Next American Revolution, Sustainable Activism for the 21st Century. I read this book when I was an undergrad and it was such an impactful read for me. One, Grace Lee Boggs is just like such a badass activist. She sadly passed away in the early 2000s, but she dedicated basically her entire life to the civil rights movement, and she has a lot of really interesting and powerful insights. And one thing I appreciate about this book is her attention to climate activism and how crucial that's going to be for the formation of all of our futures, because the planet is not doing very great. And also the way that she talks about education. So one of my big takeaways from this book was that so much of the way that we imagine education is deeply corporatized. Like you go into these schools and it's all about taking standardized tests and exams and all these inputs being turned into direct outputs in a way that's very marketable and capitalist oriented, versus seeing education for what it really can do and offer, right? Like education as something that's generative for like the human soul in and of itself, and like our development as people, not just as this thing that's going to make us more employable or better cogs in the machine, the capitalist machine that we're in. So this was a really powerful read and helped me to also reimagine my relationship to education, because as someone who is now in grad school, who has been in school for pretty much their entire life, for like the last 20 plus years, I have firsthand, of course, like many of us, experienced the trials and tribulations of that corporate like bent to education. So it's fabulous. I love Grace Lee Boggs. This is a great read. Everyone should read it. I feel like I'm gonna say that after every single like book, like this is a great read, everyone should read it. So I'm not gonna say that anymore. That's the last time I'm gonna say that. The next book I'm recommending to you is How We Get Free, Black Feminism and the Combahee River Collective Statement. I read this book probably like my sophomore or junior year of college. One of my majors in undergrad was feminist gender and sexuality studies, so I read a lot of texts like this, and whew, I mean, this book encompasses exactly what the title says, How We Get Free. The book is basically Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, who's a very well-known and respected scholar, in conversation with the key writers or the key names and folks associated with the Combahee River Collective Statement, which is a canonical, trailblazing Black feminist text. And they're just chatting about what a more free, more loving, more generative world will look and feel like. And for me, I found it to be like very soul enriching and just like nice to know that people are having these kinds of conversations. And of course, the way that they imagine freedom may not be the way that you imagine freedom, but I found it to be very aligned with my own imaginations and just gave me more ideas for what a better world could look and feel like. And that's never a bad thing. So it's also pretty short. Like I wanna say it's less than 200 pages. And it's also small. I think this is smaller than my head for scale. So you could definitely get through it. Hi Matza. You wanna talk about books? No comment. The next book we're talking about is Abolition Feminism Now. This is actually a very recently published book. I wanna say it came out in 2022. Yeah, it came out in 2022. You have some big hitters who are key writers on this book: Angela Davis, Gina Dent, Erica Miners, Beth Ritchie. So these are folks who have been doing liberation work for a long time. And essentially what I gather from this book is that an abolitionist politics without a feminist politics is not as rich and powerful as it could be, and a feminist politics without an abolitionist politics is not as impactful as it could be. And imagining abolition and feminism together as opposed to discretely is super important, and they make a pretty strong case for it. So yeah, this is very contemporary read, applies to a lot of stuff that we're experiencing right now today. This next book is called The Whole, and it is a work of nonfiction, and it was the winner of the 2017 Shirley Jackson Award. And it's really quite a fascinating read on disability within a Korean context. So without spoiling too much, this is in the first like chunk of the book, but the protagonist of the story gets into a terrible accident and ends up in a position where he can no longer care for himself anymore. And we get to hear the interior like feelings and thoughts of what he goes through as someone who has a pretty severe disability and everything that comes with that. And for me, as someone who has this privilege of being able-bodied, I appreciated having that vulnerable insight, and it just made me more cognizant of how some disabled folks may experience the world and how we can hold space for the many different ways that people need care in the world, because it doesn't look the same for everyone. The next book I would like to recommend is Asian American Feminisms and Women of Color Politics. This was also published pretty recently, I want to say. This came out in 2018 with the University of Washington Press, so very recent. And I read a couple of chapters from this book for a final paper that I was writing for one of my classes maybe a couple of months ago. And what I really appreciated is that this book is doing a couple of things at the same time. One, it's paying homage to the powerful work that women of color politics have and continue to do. And it's recognizing that Asian American feminisms and Asian American women within that women of color politics don't always get the space to explore like perhaps the specificity of their many, many, many experiences. And that's sort of what this anthology, if you will, like begins to do or tries to do, dips a toe into doing, I think, very, very well and very successfully. This anthology is really powerful. Two things that I personally appreciated were the focus on the model minority myth, and underlining that it is in fact a myth and why it is a myth, and also the attention to settler colonialisms and how settler colonialism in a place like Hawaii, for example, creates a certain kind of tension between some Asian American folks and the indigenous folks of Hawaii, and how we might think about indigeneity and Asian American identities in tandem in conversation, but also perhaps containing some kinds of tensions, and that those things need to be attended to. But no, this is really, really great. I don't know. Like everything in this video, really fantastic. This next book is also super duper new. It just came out not even a year ago, 2021. And this book is titled Hawaii is My Haven, Race and Indigeneity in the Black Pacific. I must admit, I am a little bit biased in like talking about this specific book because my advisor and my graduate program actually wrote this, and I just think she's brilliant and we work together a lot, and I have a deep appreciation for her work. This is actually the first ethnography on Black people in Hawaii, which like is wild, and it contains so much information about their lived experiences. She gives us sort of like a historical context for why Black people end up in Hawaii. Some of that is tied to the military, but there are also plenty of other reasons, like imagining Hawaii as a paradise or imagining Hawaii as an escape from the racism in the continental US. And there are all these sort of motivations for why Black people end up in the islands. And then she also talks a lot about Blackness and indigeneity and how those positionalities relate to one another in Hawaii. It's just fabulous. It's so fabulous. I read this a couple of months ago and I have a ton of notes and scribbles in here, and I just remember feeling like this is a groundbreaking piece of work that most people would never even imagine a necessity for, but it is so crucial. Making All Black Lives Matter, Reimagining Freedom in the 21st Century by Barbara Ransby, who is one of the authors of the Combahee River Collective Statement. So that ties back to the How We Get Free book that I started with towards the beginning of this video, or I guess towards this section of the video. But yeah, this I read for one of my classes in undergrad, probably around my like sophomore year. And it completely changed the way that I think about the movement for Black lives. Like even saying the movement for Black lives as opposed to saying Black Lives Matter is a subtle shift that I gathered from reading this book. But basically what Barbara Ransby is doing in this book is giving us a sense of kind of the historical trajectory of the movement for Black lives. So how it started, why it started. It was in response to, which is police brutality against Black and brown bodies. She also goes into details about particular Black and brown bodies that the movement was catalyzed to protect and to speak on behalf of. Ooh, this is good. So in the introduction, I highlighted this one very brief, like 2-sentence section, and it reads, I use the term Black-led mass struggle because it is decidedly not a Black-only struggle, and it is not only for Black liberation, but rather contextualizes the oppression, exploitation, and liberation of Black, poor, and working class people within the simple understanding, at least in the US context, that once all Black people are free, all people will be free, which is so powerful. I haven't looked at this in some time, but even just looking at that one highlighted quote, like the idea that just because we say movement for Black lives, it doesn't mean that only Black people should care about that movement or be involved in that movement. And at the same time, an understanding of the power dynamic of that, like whose voices should be front and center, and her signaling that with this phraseology of Black-led mass struggle. That's just, yeah, wow. I feel like I need to go back and reread this now. This is great. So the next book that I'd love to recommend is For the Leaders of the Future, Discussions on Youth by Daisaku Ikeda. And this is just a really powerful, like insightful book about some of the most pressing dilemmas that we deal with in our youth, whether that's like middle school, high school, into your 20s, into your 30s, depending on how you imagine youth. And really profound topics are discussed in this book, such as, you know, love. What does it mean to have genuine love? Or finding happiness, finding purpose in life, how to overcome challenges, how to develop meaningful, genuine, long-lasting friendships, like stuff that constitutes the pillars of your life. Really powerful. I also, of course, have to recommend the Combahee River Collective Statement. I guess this isn't so much a book, but I feel like everyone should read it. As I kind of mentioned when we spoke about how to get free, the CRC for short is a canonical Black feminist text. Of course, there were Black feminist thinkers before the creation of this text, but this really sort of solidified an imagination of how Black feminism could and can be used in a political space, in a political realm, and what it means for Black feminism to make certain kinds of interventions. So yeah, I think everybody should read the CRC. You can find it online on a PDF, and it's great. Another book that has had a profound impact on me is Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body. I read this my sophomore year of college for an independent study, and I was just really shocked and disgusted by the ways in which the medical institutions in the United States have taken such advantage of Black women and Puerto Rican women's bodies and personhood. For example, there's a lot of discussion of forced sterilization among Puerto Rican women and Black women because of this whole notion of the welfare queen or of undesirable children and wanting certain kinds of people, aka Black and brown people, to not have children because they were seen as a burden to the state. Not to mention the fact that people are in different economic strata because of racism and the opportunities that they aren't afforded, not necessarily because of any inherent incapability, because everyone has the same like human potential. So really wild, definitely tough to read, but really important. Atomic Habits, it's just great. I feel like everyone has raved about this book, so I won't go on and on about it too much, but really fabulous. I feel like it helped me to create more like structure in my day-to-day and in my world and how I approach like goals. So it's more of like a self-help book, but I didn't find it to be like a hard read. I think I listened to it actually as an audiobook, would highly recommend doing that. And yeah, it was great. So this book, American Hookup, The New Culture of Sex on Campus, I read my freshman year of college in a sociology class. It sounds a little like taboo, but obviously if you've been following my YouTube channel for a while, you know I'm not afraid to tackle taboo topics. But it's essentially exactly what it sounds like, thinking about hookup culture on college campuses and how that has evolved over time and space, the role that Greek life plays in that, the role that race plays in that, the role that desirability plays in that, and the role that like gendered expectations of performance plays in that. I found it so fascinating. I'm sure you can imagine as a freshman in college who was living this in real time to kind of read a sociological perspective on how hookup culture came to be as I was in a way like living in it was just really cool. And I feel like the way that Lisa Wade writes this book makes it really approachable and like fun to get through. So this is definitely one of like the lighter reads on this list for sure. Black Skin, White Masks, classic Black studies text. If you want to think about the psychology of racism and how we are all psychologically impacted by its presence, then this is a really fabulous book to read. And then lastly, I have to recommend Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. This is also a very classic text, particularly in like gender studies, queer studies circles, but of course, canonical major text, kind of hard to read. Like I struggled to read this the first time, but after encountering it many times in my classes, it kind of landed for me how powerful this text is, thinking about the ways that gender and sex are not necessarily fixed in the ways that we're taught they are, that they're very fluid and malleable and don't fit into any neat binaries. And so what does it mean to contend with that? And what does that mean for this gendered like social order that we live in? And I think the arguments that Butler presents here offer us an avenue into questioning like why the world is composed as it is and why we relate to one another as we do. And that is so powerful. Okay, y'all, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. This was super fun. Just a quick little video to share some of my favorite books with you. I know they're more kind of like academic type of books. I don't really read a lot of nonfiction, to be honest. I'm a Black studies scholar, so I read a lot of Black studies, gender studies type of stuff, but it's important nonetheless. I know sometimes these kinds of texts can be hard to move through, but I hope that maybe you'll pick one or two of them up and let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let me know, as always, if you'd like to see a certain kind of video from me next, and take good care until I see you again. Bye.